July 2nd, 1943, dawned over Castelvetrano, Sicily, with a golden sun climbing lazily over olive groves and terracotta rooftops. In the skies above, a group of American fighter planes sliced through the warm Mediterranean air, their engines humming a tense, mechanical symphony. Among them was Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a young black pilot from Alabama, gripping the controls of his P-40 Warhawk with a focus that could have pierced steel. Today, he would attempt what no black American pilot had done before: score a confirmed aerial victory against the Luftwaffe. The enormity of the moment weighed on him not just the life-or-death calculus of combat, but the silent, invisible scrutiny of both allies and enemies alike. And then, it happened. In a blink, Hall maneuvered behind a Messerschmitt Bf-1A9, sights aligned, fingered poised. The burst of gunfire erupted, shattering the calm of the morning skies. Smoke spiraled from the enemy aircraft, and it plunged toward the Sicilian landscape below. Charles B. Hall had made history. The first African-American pilot to shoot down an enemy plane in World War II. Yet as the Warhawks returned to base, a wave of disbelief rippled through the European theater. Could the small, segregated group of men, long underestimated and dismissed, truly turn the tide of prejudice and war simultaneously? The context of Hall's victory magnified its significance. Nazi ideology was built on the notion of racial hierarchy, an absurd doctrine that had permeated military doctrine and propaganda. To see a black pilot triumph in the skies was not just a military anomaly, it was a symbolic affront to an empire built on racial supremacy. Across the Italian theater, German officers squinted at reports and photographs, questioning their own intelligence. How could these men possibly fight so effectively? At the same time, back home in the United States, doubts persisted. Segregation was the law of the land, and many in the Army hierarchy still believed African Americans were ill-suited for combat aviation. The stage was set. The Tuskegee Airmen would have to prove their worth, not just against enemy pilots, but against systemic prejudice at home. Before these victories could come, however, the men of the 99th Fighter Squadron had to overcome years of institutional barriers. Segregation policies had long excluded African Americans from aviation training, while the War Department often questioned their mental and physical suitability. The Tuskegee experiment, as it was called, became both an opportunity and a test. Pilots like Charles Hall, Leonard Oxon, and Lee Archer were carefully monitored, evaluated, and doubted at every turn. Each mission was a gamble, a chance to validate not just personal skill, but the legitimacy of their entire race in the eyes of a skeptical military. As their aircraft roared through the sky, a quiet question lingered among their commanders and peers. Could a handful of determined black pilots withstand the pressure and danger of aerial combat and emerge victorious? Their first combat missions were fraught with peril. Pantelleria, a small Sicilian island fortified with Italian and German defenses, became the proving ground for the Tuskegee Airmen. Flying low over rocky coastlines, the pilots dodged anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters' intense, coordinated attacks. Each sortie tested their nerves, skill, and cohesion as a squadron. On June 2nd, 1943, just a month before Hall's historic kill, the 99th had engaged in its first major mission. Observers noted their precision under fire, yet whispers persisted in command circles. Are they truly capable, or merely lucky? The pilots themselves knew the stakes went beyond luck. Every maneuver, every split-second decision could affirm or disprove decades of prejudice. As Hall completed his 8th mission, flying in tight formation with his fellow airmen, he encountered yet another Bf-109. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, an almost physical weight pressing down on him. With a steady hand and unwavering focus, he executed a textbook attack run. The enemy aircraft erupted in a plume of smoke and fire. Hall's first confirmed kill had stunned the world, but he had no time to celebrate. Over Sicily, more enemy fighters approached. The skies themselves seemed to conspire against the pilots, forcing them into evasive maneuvers that would test every ounce of skill and courage. Would the Tuskegee Airmen survive long enough to prove that Hall's success was no fluke? News of their victories slowly began to spread. Within the U.S. military, skepticism remained, but momentum was building. The narrative of African-American incompetence in combat was beginning to crack. Civil rights leaders watched with cautious optimism, understanding that these young pilots carried not only bombs and bullets, but the hopes of an entire community demanding equality. Public Law 18, passed to formally integrate black aviators into the war effort, provided a legal framework, but hearts and minds lagged behind. Even as the 99th Squadron prepared for future missions, a silent, pressing question loomed. Could these men transform fleeting moments of triumph into a lasting legacy of skill, bravery, and change? The first kill marked only the beginning. Across North Africa and Italy, the Tuskegee Airmen would face deadly dogfights, treacherous weather, and the constant weight of racial prejudice. Yet, their resolve never wavered. Every mission would become a testament to their determination, their skill, and the enduring belief that the skies held no room for racism, only courage. And as the Red Tail's distinctive P-40s roared into the Mediterranean sun, one truth became undeniable. The world was about to witness a new chapter in both military and social history. For viewers inspired by this story, the journey of the Tuskegee Airmen is far from over. If you want to honor their courage and help bring more incredible history to light, make sure to subscribe and like this video. Ensures that the stories of those who defied the odds reach every corner of the world. Long before the roar of vengeance over Sicily, before Charles Bahal's historic kill, the dream of African-American pilots had been stifled by decades of systemic barriers. In the 1920s and 1930s, the skies were not open to all. Segregation defined not just society on the ground, but the possibilities of the air. The 1925 U.S. Army War College report, quietly but firmly, deemed African Americans unsuitable for aviation. Political and military leaders believed that the responsibilities of flight split-second decisions, high-speed maneuvering, and deadly accuracy were beyond the capabilities of black men. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Nuremberg laws in Nazi Germany codified a brutal hierarchy of race, reinforcing the idea that supremacy could be proven in the air, just as it could be enforced on the ground. For young African Americans who dreamed of flight, the challenge was double. Overcome prejudice at home while preparing to face the deadliest air forces in the world. Yet pioneers refused to be grounded. Eugene Bullard, the first black fighter pilot in World War I, had flown for France when the U.S. military would not accept him. Haulman, who learned to fly in France in the 1920s, shattered barriers that the United States stubbornly kept in place. Back in America, the Coffee School of Aeronautics in Chicago quietly trained a generation of black pilots, teaching them the skills and discipline that would later define the Tuskegee Airmen. These men and women embodied determination in a world that had written them off. But the question remained, could their efforts, often overlooked and underfunded, translate into real military opportunity? Political pressure began to mount. Civil rights leaders, emboldened by decades of activism, argued that African Americans deserved the right to serve as military aid. The Roosevelt administration, aware of both the moral imperative and the practical need for more pilots, began to act. Public Law 18 officially authorized the formation of African American fighter squadrons, a legal breakthrough that opened doors long closed. Even so, approval on paper was not the same as acceptance in practice. The newly formed 99th Fighter Squadron was small, under-resourced, and watched closely by skeptical commanders. Every pilot who stepped into a cockpit carried the weight of proving not just personal competence, but the capabilities of an entire race. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a West Point graduate and son of a career Army officer, was chosen to lead these young men. Davis, disciplined, meticulous, and relentless, knew the magnitude of his responsibility. At West Point, he had faced ridicule, isolation, and overt racism at every turn. Now, he was entrusted with commanding the 99th Squadron, 26 pilots, who shared his ambition and endured similar burdens. The squadron's first missions in North Africa would test every ounce of skill, leadership, and courage the men possessed. Would Davis be able to mold them into a unit capable of facing the Luftwaffe and, more dauntingly, the prejudices of their own military? Their first combat sorties were anything but simple. On June 2, 1943, the 99th engaged in their first major operation over the island of Panama, flying low and fast against entrenched anti-aircraft fire. The young pilots executed maneuvers that reflected both courage and precision, yet their every success was scrutinized. A minor mistake could be exaggerated into evidence that black pilots were unfit for combat. After the mission, as debriefings recounted their professional performance, Davis felt a quiet tension. Would the accomplishments of Pantellaria be enough to silence critics, or would the shadow of prejudice continue to loom over his men? As training continued in Tuskegee, Alabama, the pilots faced not only mechanical and combat challenges, but the weight of segregated facilities, inadequate equipment, and constant doubt from instructors. The airfield itself became a crucible. Every flight was a lesson in endurance, teamwork, and resilience. Some nights, the pilots would lie awake, listening to the engines of older aircraft, imagining the battles yet to come, wondering whether their skill would ever be truly recognized. Meanwhile, back in Washington, the military debated whether these men should be integrated into combat units or relegated to support roles. Each decision could change the course of their lives and the legacy of African Americans in aviation forever. In the midst of these pressures, small victories hinted at the possibilities ahead. Graduations from Tuskegee Airfield were moments of triumph, each pilot's name inscribed into a growing record of skill and determination. Yet the larger question persisted: once deployed, could they translate training into battlefield effectiveness against a seasoned and ruthless enemy? The 99th's first missions in Sicily would soon answer that question. But until then, the air above Italy remained a proving ground in both imagination and expectation. Could these men, so long denied opportunity, rise to meet the impossible challenges that awaited them? By mid-1943, the squadron was ready for combat. Aircraft were polished, tactics drilled, and men mentally hardened for the dangers of aerial warfare. Davis and his pilots knew that success would require more than courage. It would demand flawless coordination, discipline, and trust in one another. Yet even as they prepared, a lingering doubt hovered in the minds of allies and skeptics alike. Would these pilots, often dismissed by those who commanded them, emerge as the heroes history had yet to imagine, or would prejudice prove a hurdle too high, even in the skies? The story of the Tuskegee Airmen was not just about flying. It was about breaking barriers, defying expectations, and rewriting history. Each pilot carried the hopes of an entire community on his shoulders, knowing that every mission could either cement their place in history or be dismissed as a fluke. As the engines roared to life for their first operational missions, one question burned in every mind: could courage and skill alone overcome a world determined to underestimate them? By the summer of 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron had arrived in the Mediterranean, ready to confront both the Luftwaffe and the weight of history. Lieutenant Charles B. Hall prepared for his 8th mission, the tension in his cockpit as sharp as the tips of his propeller blades. Flying above Sicily, he scanned the horizon for enemy fighters, knowing that every maneuver carried more than the usual stakes. Skill, courage, and survival were vital. But so was proving that black pilots could hold their own in the most unforgiving of arenas. The sun glinted off his P-40 Warhawk, painting its nose with golden light, and in that moment, Hall became a symbol of persistence against prejudice, poised on the brink of history once again. The engagement began almost immediately. German Messerschmitts swooped from the clouds, their engines shrieking a deadly warning. Hall and his squadron moved with precise coordination, trading evasive maneuvers and retaliatory bursts of fire. In a moment of split-second decision, Hall lined up his sights, squeezed the trigger, and watched a Bf-109 spiral down in smoke. The exhilaration of success was fleeting, replaced by the awareness of more enemies closing in. Would the squadron survive the relentless onslaught, proving that their first victories were no accident? The skies were both crucible and proving ground, and the outcome would ripple far beyond Sicily. The growing reputation of the 99th Fighter Squadron drew attention. Allied commanders, once skeptical, began to note their skill, while German pilots whispered incredulously about the black aviators who fight like seasoned veterans. Yet accolades were tempered by persistent doubt and logistical challenges. Supplies were scarce, maintenance crews overworked, and the men of the 99th operated with a constant reminder that any failure could be used to justify discrimination. The next mission, the bombing raids over Pantelleria, tested them further. Each bomber escort was a delicate dance of protection and aggression. Any lapse could mean death for both the airmen and the crews they were sworn to defend. Could they sustain their growing reputation in the face of such relentless pressure? By January 27, 1944, the 99th faced their most formidable test, yet at the Anzio beachhead in Italy. The Luftwaffe, desperate to halt the Allied advance, deployed seasoned fighter pilots armed with superior aircraft. Red-tailed P-40S streaked through the skies, a crimson flash signaling defiance against both enemy and expectation. Pilots engaged in ferocious dogfights, weaving through clouds and gunfire, each maneuver requiring the full mastery of skill honed at Tuskegee. Several 99th pilots claimed multiple kills that day. The casualties and damage were high. As the squadron regrouped, a silent question loomed. Could these men, so often doubted, continue to succeed against increasingly deadly odds? It was in this crucible that the 332nd Fighter Group was formed, consolidating the 99th with other African American squadrons and introducing the iconic red-tail P-51 Mustangs. The crimson markings were more than cosmetic. They were a statement of identity, pride, and excellence. These aircraft would become legendary, symbols of protection for Allied bombers, and proof that African American pilots could excel at the highest levels of aerial warfare. Yet their role came with immense responsibility. "Our job is not to be aces," Davis would remind his men. "Our job is to bring those bombers home." With that philosophy, every mission became a measure of both skill and discipline. One of the most harrowing missions occurred on July 18, 1944, during a bombing run to Memmingen, Germany. The Red Tails escorted over 200 Allied bombers, facing waves of German fighters intent on destruction. The sky became a maelstrom of gunfire, smoke, and spinning aircraft. Red Tails dove and climbed, covering the bombers with relentless determination. Every second mattered. A single mistake could cost lives and shatter hard-won trust. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Tuskegee Airmen maintained their record, protecting the bombers and proving their tactical genius in combat. But as the mission concluded, a gnawing tension lingered. Could they continue to maintain such excellence as enemy technology and strategies grew ever more lethal? Throughout these operations, the Red Tails legend grew. Reports circulated among both Allies and Axis forces, praising their effectiveness, precision, and fearlessness. But every success was shadowed by the ever-present doubt that some leaders still harbored. The pilots themselves carried the dual burden of fighting a formidable enemy while dismantling centuries of prejudice. Each mission, each victory, was a step toward transforming perception. Yet the question remained, would history fully recognize their skill, or would their legacy be diminished by the color of their skin? As the Tuskegee Airmen carved their place in military history, their story transcended aviation. They were not just pilots, they were symbols of perseverance, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice in the face of systemic oppression. Their victories at Anzio and across Europe were not isolated feats. They were proof that skill, discipline, and unity could overcome prejudice and fear. And as they prepared for the final, decisive battles against a crumbling Nazi Luftwaffe, one truth became clear. The Red Tails were more than legends. They were pioneers of equality in the skies. For those inspired by this remarkable story, subscribing and liking this video ensures that the extraordinary courage and legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen continues to reach people worldwide. Their story is a reminder that determination, skill, and perseverance can change the course of history. By early 1945, the war in Europe had reached a critical juncture. The Allies were pushing deeper into German territory, and the Luftwaffe, though battered, remained a dangerous adversary. For the Tuskegee Airmen, this phase of the war presented the ultimate test. Their missions were no longer simply about proving themselves. They were about ensuring the destruction of Nazi industry and protecting the lives of hundreds of bomber crews. On March 24, 1945, the Red Tails embarked on one of their most daring operations. An escort mission to Berlin targeting the Daimler-Benz tank factory, a critical hub of German war production. Intelligence reports warned of the presence of the Messerschmitt Me 262 jets faster, deadlier, and technologically advanced beyond anything the Allies had faced before. Could the Red Tails protect the bombers against these formidable new foes, or would the skies of Berlin become their grave? As the Tuskegee pilots approached Berlin, the tension in the air was palpable. The Me 262s, the first operational jet fighters in history, streaked through the clouds with near unmatchable speed. Traditional dogfighting tactics seemed almost obsolete against such machines, yet the Red Tails adapted, using superior coordination, discipline, and unshakable courage to intercept attacks and shield the bombers. Each maneuver was executed with razor-sharp precision, a testament to years of rigorous training and battlefield experience. The skies over Berlin became a maelstrom of smoke, tracer rounds, and spinning aircraft. Each second, a battle for survival. And as the bombers dropped their payloads on the factory below, every pilot knew that the war's outcome and their own legacy hung in the balance. The results were extraordinary. Despite the technological advantage of the German jets, none of the bombers under Tuskegee escort were lost. Pilots like Lee Archer and Roscoe Brown made repeated defensive strikes, earning accolades from Allied commanders and fear from the Luftwaffe. Their skill and determination had not only protected lives, but also shattered lingering doubts about African-American pilots' abilities. The Red Tails had proven that courage, training, and discipline could overcome even the most daunting technological and racial barriers. Yet even as Berlin receded behind them, another question arose. How would their sacrifices and brilliance be remembered in a world that had long marginalized them? The final months of the war saw the Tuskegee Airmen continued their exemplary performance. Escort missions over southern Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia became routine displays of tactical brilliance. Their distinctive red-tailed Mustangs were instantly recognizable to both allies and enemies, a symbol of reliability, skill, and defiance. Reports circulated that the 332nd Fighter Group had never lost a bomber under their escort, a remarkable feat unmatched by any other unit in the European theater. Across battlefields and bases, whispers of admiration grew, but so too did anticipation of how history would recount their deeds. Could the world recognize not just the missions flown, but the racial and social barriers shattered in their execution? As victory in Europe became inevitable, the Tuskegee Airmen returned home to a nation still struggling with segregation. Their accomplishments in the air had earned respect abroad, yet at home, recognition lagged. Congressional hearings, civil rights organizations, and military advocates began the slow work of documenting their heroism, ensuring their place in history. The men who had faced gunfire and prejudice alike were now tasked with proving the same resilience in the court of public opinion. Would America embrace their story as a national triumph, or would it remain a footnote overshadowed by racial bias? The legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen extends far beyond statistics and medals. Their courage dismantled the myth of racial inferiority, inspired generations of aviators, and laid the groundwork for the eventual integration of the U.S. Armed Forces in 1948. Under President Truman's Executive Order 9981. Today, the Red Tails are celebrated not merely as fighter pilots, but as symbols of perseverance, equality, and excellence against overwhelming odds. Theirs is a story of individual valor intertwined with social progress, proving that the fight for freedom abroad and justice at home could converge in a single squadron of determined young men. Even now, decades later, the question lingers for historians and admirers alike. Could one squadron of pilots in a segregated military really change the trajectory of war in societies so profoundly? The answer, resounding in every surviving record and personal testimony, is unequivocal. The Tuskegee Airmen rewrote the rules of both combat and civil rights, leaving an indelible mark on history. Their legacy reminds us that courage, skill, and perseverance are forces capable of dismantling prejudice, altering the course of conflict, and inspiring generations yet unborn. As we reflect on their journey from the skies of Sicily to the heart of Berlin I, truth becomes undeniable. The Tuskegee Airmen did not simply participate in history. They shaped Italiano. Their triumph over both enemy fire and societal bias stands as a beacon of hope, proof that extraordinary courage can overcome extraordinary obstacles. And in remembering them, we honor not only their aerial victories, but the ideals of equality, bravery, and unyielding resolve that they embodied.